Peter Drury and Jim Beglin, you know, it's a real privilege to be able to sit here and talk to you because quite often we've come face to face, but at matches, and we're always a little bit busy. We're always a little bit tied up with whatever pressing matters we have to attend to. So this is a proper conversation, and I'm really looking forward to this. So first and foremost, how are you both doing?
Well, I'll speak for myself, Adam, and say I'm doing absolutely fine, thank you. At times like this, you have to remind yourself how lucky you are, you know. There's a lot of people genuinely suffering out there who've been through a lot of pain and are still going through a lot of pain. I'm surrounded by my family. I'm at home. I'm healthy. I've got a bit of space that I can exercise in. I'm reading books. I'm even doing some cooking, and my family's still alive. So there you are.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it could be a lot worse, and I know for a lot of people it is a lot worse. Missing football, but if that's the worst of my problems, I'm not so bad.
Yeah, listen, I concur with all that as well, Adam. Peter said that you have to put things in perspective at a time like this when so many people are suffering from the pandemic. I mean, thankfully, my family and I are all in good shape. And that's the first thing you think of before looking anywhere else. So thank goodness for that.
Have you two been in regular contact throughout this lockdown period? I know the timelines differ in the UK to Malaysia from when it started, but I saw Jim actually put up a video of Peter because I think fans are wondering, how is Peter Drury doing? Because there's no other way of communicating with him.
Yeah, well, that's my shortcoming. We won't go into that, Adam, but as you know, I'm a social media dinosaur, and Jim is very good at communicating on it, and he did me a little bit of a favour by allowing me to do that, which was very nice. Funnily enough, I think we went 3 or 4 weeks without communicating for a little while, Jim and I, which is probably as long as we've been for 15 or 20 years. So it must have been a great thrill for him to be rid of me.
No, but listen, when it comes to social media, I probably get more followers because I'm the closest thing people can get to Peter Drury. You know, he's the one they all want to get near, and they want to know everything about Peter. And we know what that comes from because of his delivery around the world, week in, week out on the Premier League. And it's just great for me to have a chance to sit beside him and listen away and just speak when I'm told.
You know, in defense of your legacy, I think it's because Peter is a very hard man to track down. I mean, there's not much on Google about him. There's not much on YouTube about him. Whereas with Jim Beglin, well, if you're a Liverpool fan of a certain age, you'll certainly already know who you are. So
Adam, listen, he's flattered me, so let me get the next word in. The point is, I'm just a lucky fan with a microphone, you know. I get to shout the names. And that's nice. That is nice. I love doing it. I'm not knocking it. And if it sometimes resonates successfully with fans around the world, well, I'm very, very pleased to hear that. The point is that Jim Beglin, as well as being a top-class broadcaster, was a top-class footballer who actually would be a whole lot more famous than he already is and celebrated had his career not been cut short by a very, very nasty injury. You know, and the fact that I've often referred to him as one of the luckiest people alive and one of the unluckiest. That is to say, he won a double with Liverpool. That is an extraordinary line on anybody's CV. Extraordinary. But then he had it all snatched away. But he had the resolve to go and make himself into a top-class broadcaster after that. He's had a second excellent career. And to me, you know, that makes him both fortunate twice, but also shows a great inner resolve. And none of what I say is remotely credible if he doesn't put a tick next to it, because he's the bloke who played at a very, very high level.
I completely agree, and nobody can put it in better words than Peter Drury himself. In fact, I'm thinking of certain occasions, the Andre Gomez injury, for example. I think I've spoken to Jim about this, and I spoke to Gary Stevens, not the one that injured Jim, the one that works here in Malaysia, who played for Tottenham. I should add, there were two at the same time. And when you say something like that, Jim, I mean, does it pull at your heartstrings? Does it make you relate more than anybody else out there? What goes through your head when you see something really horrible on the pitch?
Just pity, really, because I hate to see any player get injured because I know how much you can suffer. When it's your dream and it becomes your livelihood, becomes fulfillment of that dream, and you're living the life, then it's a really hard thing to take when you can't do it anymore because you've suffered a very serious injury. And that day in the Everton-Tottenham game at Goodison, I was shocked because I got a little view on our monitor of Andre Gomez and what he had suffered. And immediately I was just hit with sadness because, you know, I knew there was going to be a long delay. We were going to have to deliberate over. And I was just thinking, like I thought when I got injured that night on the same pitch, that you have to apply logic to it, and you have to kind of start thinking positively. Even then, you have to think, no, it'll be okay. I'm going to come back from this, you know. And I've always been a glass half full person like that. But it's never nice to see a player go down in circumstances like that, or indeed be stretchered off the pitch, and there's that kind of unknowing feeling of what's going to happen next, what's the diagnosis going to be. So I don't like seeing that on football pitches based on my own experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I sought your counsel about it, just because you can relate. And I just wanted to know what would have been going through Andre Gomez's injury, because it's just so horrific to see. So moving on swiftly to a lighter topic, how long have you two actually known each other now?
Oh, good question. I would say probably 25, 26 years. I think we both, we worked together for the first time sporadically for BBC Radio in the mid-90s. And then we both had a similar sort of spell together on the sort of biggest commercial network in the UK, ITV, which for most of our years there had exclusive rights to the Champions League. And Jim and I travelled Europe and indeed major international tournaments, travelled the world together over that period too, which dovetailed, in fact overlapped for a while, with the expansion of Premier League broadcasts globally, which is principally what we do together now. So it must be a quarter of a century. I'm afraid that much of your life you've wasted on me, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I followed you everywhere you've gone. Back in the BBC Radio days, and then to ITV, as you mentioned, and then on to Premier League productions. And it's been great. I can't quite remember the first game we did together, but I do remember us both at the Britannia Stadium in Stoke, doing a Stoke game and seeing an incident which we could relate back to one of the World Cups and Pele and something he'd done with a dummy. And we had a bit of fun around that, and it's just gone from there.
Yeah.
In football, quite often you see people working together now, and specifically more for teams. And you think, oh, they must be good friends off the pitch as well. But it turns out they're not. I mean, now we know that Teddy Sheringham and Andrew or Andy Cole don't get on. On the pitch, they could play very well together. Would you two consider yourself good friends off the pitch as well? Does that aid your chemistry when you're commentating on a match?
No, can't stand him.
Brutal honesty. Brutal.
No.
Likewise.
The truth is, I don't think we've ever had a crossword. It's difficult, Adam, to answer that question without sounding overly gushing. But happily, we do get on very well. Yes, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Don't get the impression we live in each other's pockets, because we don't. I mean, we live at either end of the country. We broadly speaking only meet when we work, but we do work together an awful lot, so we meet an awful lot, and we're never stuck for something to say. It's a very happy partnership we have. I hope Jim believes that too.
Yeah, no, I do. It has to be, because I spend more time with you than my missus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly so.
Are Christmas cards sent to each other?
Oh, well, there's a question.
I don't think we do we?
I don't think we do, no. I don't think we do. But then, we generally eat together on Boxing Day, so that sort of covers that.
Yeah, I completely understand that. And I just want to say, on my perspective, both of you, for when I've been to matches of the past couple of years, are just so affable, so genuine, and so easy to talk to. I've even talked to Jim on the streets of Norwich. He was walking around by himself, looking a little bit lost, I should add. But I've realized that both of you will talk to anybody who wants to chat football, like probably anything in general.
The reason for that is, Adam, if I may say so, and again, I don't presume to speak for Jim. We speak to anybody because we are anybody. That's the truth. I like to, this has nothing to do with football or anything, and please stop me when I start preaching, but I personally like to think that all human beings are the same, and anybody who thinks that they're better than anybody else needs to have a good look in the mirror. I certainly don't think that. And I know Jim doesn't either. All we are is lucky people to do what we do for a living. And I'm sure you would say the same about your situation. A lot, millions and millions of young men and women would love the chance to do what I do. And so if you're going to be grumpy about it, you're probably, you probably ought to let someone else have a go.
Yeah,
That's my view.
I think I would, again, echo those words, Peter, because I think whatever you do in life, it shouldn't be driven by arrogance and supreme confidence and strutting about as if you think you've arrived, because we look upon it, or certainly I do, that as soon as you start letting those thoughts enter your head, then you get complacent. You go soft. If you think you've cracked it and all you have to do is roll up, you still have to put the hard work in. You still have to put the preparation in. You still have to apply humility to what you do. And I think we've often been like that. We never get blasé. We never think that we have a right to be in this position. We're always very grateful for the possibility of doing what we do. And many a time before big games, we look at one another and say, we're lucky. And we pinch ourselves. And that will never change. That will never change. You have to just get your head down and graft and do what needs to be done. And just keep your mouth shut after that.
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah, it's just not every day. I talk to someone at a traffic crossing light for about 15 minutes in the middle of Norwich, what I've never been to in my entire life.
That was before the Norwich-Liverpool game.
It was, yes, it was.
Yeah, I remember.
The storm was coming in.
They kicked me out of the hotel.
Yes, and I remember you were worried about trying to make your way in, so you came down the night before, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, we do that sometimes just to make life a little easier, because we're always darting about the country. And sometimes we need to get away very quickly after games, knowing that it will make it easier for us because of what we're doing the next day. But I always try and make it as comfortable as I can. I know Peter does as well. And sometimes just the schedule says, no, you've got to go away on the Friday night for the Saturday lunchtime game, even though you don't want to, but it's usually the right decision to make.
Yeah, and missing holidays as well, of course. Let's not forget that. My wife is always complaining, particularly as I'm working in the time zone 7 or 8 hours behind of where we are. What about the traveling? Because I don't know about you, but sometimes it gets very tiring. Are there any journeys you don't look forward to? Personally, for myself, I remember I had to interview Sean Dyche in Burnley on a Wednesday, I think. And then the next day I had to be in Bournemouth in the morning for an interview with Eddie Howe. It's 5 hours on the train for a 10-minute interview.
Yeah, well, it can be wearing, Adam. But again, I would say if you start to get weary and fed up of the travel and all of those things, which we do, we're only human beings. I'm not pretending to be an angel here, but it is worth reminding yourself again what you're doing by comparison with people who do real work. Yes. And, if there's a train so packed that you have to squeeze into a corridor, well, listen, be grumpy for a couple of hours by all means, but you're still only going to a football match or coming home from a football match. Actually, to be semi-serious for a second, travel post-pandemic is going to be a very interesting phenomenon. I saw news items about it last night. Obviously, trains won't be allowed to be packed in the immediate aftermath of coronavirus. So getting a seat on a train will be harder. Tickets will be scarcer. People will therefore, on the whole, perhaps get back into their cars more. The motorways, therefore, will be more packed. I'm already starting to panic about my first journey back to a Premier League game. But by the way, when it comes round, that first Premier League game, I'll be so excited, I'll probably leave 2 days in advance.
you and I both. When it comes to the nitty-gritty of commentary, I think one thing which fans would love to know, how do you clarify how to pronounce certain names?
Well, I always leave it to the commentator. I've always been like that. And as a co-com, as second fiddle, as it were, I will always go to whatever commentator I'm working with, and Peter, obviously, and say, right, how are we going with this? And then we try and work it out, and we come to an agreement, and we try and get it right. But if we're saying the same thing together, the same pronunciation together, it sounds right, even though you're getting it wrong. So I always consult whoever I'm with, and Peter usually gets it right.
Well, sometimes the fact is that it's almost impossible to get it right all of the time. I'll give you, Adam, the best example I've got of this, and you can sort of relay it to almost any of the complicated names. Kevin De Bruyne, arguably the best player in the Premier League, or certainly has been and is in spells, whatever you like to say. There was a game Jim and I did together at Chelsea for Manchester City a couple of seasons back. The Belgian television commentators were in front of us, and there was still an ongoing argument about whether he was De Bruyne or De Bruyne. And I know, by the way, there are arguments about the vowel sound. It could be De Bruyne, all sorts. But we tapped the Belgians on their shoulder and said, are we saying De Bruyne or De Bruyne? And that day, we happened to be speaking to a guy who turned around and said De Bruyne. That day, Kevin De Bruyne scored a terrific goal. It's the one and only goal on the Premier League archive in which the commentator says De Bruyne, because it turns out that De Bruyne was just some regional pronunciation and that the rest of Belgium was calling him De Bruyne. And so neither was wrong, neither was right. The collective view was that it should be De Bruyne, but for that day only, I knocked a syllable off his name. And every time I hear that goal replayed, and it was a good goal, so it comes around quite often, it sends a little shiver down my spine. You can't always get it right.
No, certainly not. And the one that pops to mind is actually another Belgium. And I asked him in person, which would you prefer? It's company. So it's either Vincent or Vincent. Which one do you go with? Because technically they're both correct.
Yeah. Well, we did go with the French, didn't we, Peter? A while ago. So, yeah. But I think we then went back to the English way. We were Vincent. And same with N'Golo Conte at Chelsea, and we were getting lots of stick because they had Antonio Conte as manager, and they were all coming on saying it's Conte, and we were trying to say no, it's the French, it's Conte. That's how they pronounce it. You can't win. You can't.
Yeah. That was actually my next point. What happens when names change, like N'Golo Kante and Conte? What about the notes that you've prepared? Because I looked at the video, the tweet that you sent out, Jim, and it had Peter showcasing the notes for the last match he was supposed to have commentated on. Forgive me, I can't remember which game it was, but it was so extensive and color-coded. How long does it take you to prepare for a single match for both of you?
Well, from my point of view, sorry, Jim, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, Peter, I think you threw an extra couple of pages in on that.
They're here. Actually, Jim, they're here. I've got in front of me, I won't get them all out again, but I've got in front of me, here's my file with Watford-Leicester, which was the Saturday. And here's my file, which is not quite so complete, with West Ham-Wolves, which was the Sunday. And here's my file, which is even more incomplete, with Liverpool-Everton, which was the Monday, and which I couldn't obviously complete properly because Liverpool-Everton on the Monday might have been the title decider, and I couldn't do my homework properly for that until I knew what the Manchester City score was the previous day or on the Saturday or whenever it was. But in answer to your question, Adam, for me, I always say that a match on average is a day's work at the desk. Now that average is made up of quite wild variance, because at the one extreme, mid-season, when Manchester United play Liverpool, there's not a great deal, actually, the commentator can tell the audience that the audience doesn't already know. There are the basic facts and figures, who scored how many goals, what happened the last time they met, and so on. But a game like that, to a large degree, carries itself. So mid-season, that can be half a day's work. And ahead of a 2 or 3 game weekend, you're often grateful for that. At the other extreme, if you're covering a team that you haven't very often, for instance, I didn't do Sheffield United for the first time until January this year. And so Sheffield United on a Friday night, I remember, being a long day's work because a lot of their narrative had already built and I hadn't been a part of it. So that was perhaps that game more than a day's work. If you're doing a Champions League game with a lesser known club, again, you've got to watch videos and learn the players and so on, or early rounds of the FA Cup in a non-league club, a lot to learn there. So if you take an average as a day's work and work back from that in either direction. But Jim's preparation, of course, is very different because he's all about overviewing teams' performances and seeing how they work tactically and so on.
But I mean, I learned a lot from the likes of Peter and one or two other commentators I've worked with, because I think initially when I moved into the TV world, I realized that I was sitting down with university educated people, and I knew the first thing I had to do was I had to broaden my vocabulary. I had to work at that, and I did. And I also learned that I can prepare in that way too, not as extensively as the commentators do, because they have to have everything in position to be able to deliver in a broadcast. But I could do it in my own analytical way, and I do. But there are some times that you will never even get a chance to look down at a page in front of you if you've made some notes, because you've got a really exciting game and you're just carried away with it. And that's lovely. It's lovely to be able to do that. But also you can get games that are stolid, stultifying, horrible. And then you might need to be able to look down and think, well, okay, now I can maybe make that point or make that point. And it just kind of refreshes your mind at times when you might be struggling a little. And, you know, sometimes we've looked at each other facially over the microphone, and I'm not admitting this, and we both know that we're watching a stinker, and we're both kind of going, you know, and at times like that, then, you know, the little pointers that you've made in advance can be very valuable indeed.
Yeah. I think we've all been in that situation. If I'm covering the game on TV, I have to come on before the match, at halftime, and the post-match to try and talk about a stinker and effectively try to sell the product when it's not very good. I mean, it can also be very, very tricky thinking on the fly because you can't prepare.
They can be the most rewarding days sometimes, Adam. Everybody comes up to you after a 4-3 saying, oh, brilliant, you know, that was wonderful work and all of that. But when you've got a 0-0, and for me, certainly as a co-com, in analysing it, you've already qualified the analysis in the first 5 minutes of the game because you know they're going to go for it, you know they're going to sit back, and it's almost done. And like any job, I guess, as well, it's repetitive. And you have to find a different way of saying the same thing. That's a big part of the job. You have to come at it from a different angle. Because if I've already, say, given my analytical viewpoint after the first 5 minutes, I can't just keep referring to that and keep going back saying the same thing. I have to be able to tackle it from a different angle at times so as not to upset the viewer.
Another aspect of preparation I want to talk about, and perhaps this is more for Peter, would be some of the words that you use, some of the analogies or similes, the language you use. I think a poet, I think that's a good way to describe your choice of vocab sometimes. In fact, there are videos on YouTube of Peter Drury's commentary for goals. One video has 6.5 million views. Just because people want to hear you describe a goal. Do you prepare anything beforehand if you think, oh, you know what, this might work?
This is a question I'm asked often, Adam, and this is what I say. Well, this is what the situation is. I think I can prepare words, and in fact, I think I would be unprofessional not to prepare thoroughly for everything up to the moment the ball is kicked. So teams coming out of the tunnel, the team boards coming up, the teams shaking hands, all of that sort of stuff. To me, that is a set piece. It's a given. And not to be ready for that would be like Cristiano Ronaldo not practicing free kicks. Of course he does. He knows that the ball is there, the wall is there, the goal is there, where the goalkeeper's going to stand, and he can rehearse that, and that's why he's so good at it. I know exactly what the setup is going to be. I know when the roar of the crowd is going to come, and I can prepare words around all of that, and I make no apology for that. It seems to me obvious. But once the ball is kicked, it would be equally wrong to script anything. Because A, if you do, it sounds like it. And B, the truth of the matter is that whatever you might script won't actually, by some nuance or degree of difference, won't actually be quite what you were ready for. And so it'll just jar. It'll just jar. And I'll give you an example of this, because another thing you can be ready for, of course, last day of the season, when the final whistle goes, Manchester City are champions. So you might have something ready to sum up that on the final whistle. On Aguero Day in 2012, I had got something ready for the final whistle, based on the near certainty that Manchester City were going to win a routine game against Queen's Park Rangers and thereby become champions. Nobody, of course, had foreseen any of the drama that did unfold. If at the final whistle that day, I had simply read out what I had thought about the night before, that would have been entirely inadequate and wrong. And thankfully I didn't, thankfully that day looked after itself. And that was a really good lesson and a reminder to me not to be casting my mind ahead or imagining what might happen too much, because ultimately you have to trust yourself in the moment.
Yeah, certainly. Final few questions because my time is running out. You both together, not individually, have now transcended football into the digital world, doing video game commentary as well, which strikes me as a lot of fun. Is that also something you both enjoy? And do you get tweets sent to you? I know this is more for Jim than Peter, obviously, concerning the video game stuff as well.
Yeah, I do. I think generally it's positive, but you do get the gamers who've maybe lost in the last minute. And then I utter an inane statement or sentence and they lose the plot and they lash out at me on Twitter.
They blame you for something that happened in a video game.
They blame me, yeah. That's the way it is.
Quite right, it is your fault.
Yeah. I've been at it now for 10 years, and I must admit, when I first began, I found it very hard because I had to do an awful lot of recording, and you get brain dead at certain times. You just can't think of another line because there are tons and tons of different trigger conditions for the game. Sometimes you can get stuck on a particular subject and you can be there for 2 hours, and it just plays on your mind and makes it hard. But I began to make life easy for me when I started rewriting things and the way I would deliver things and putting my own little analytical
voice
word in or two. And you've also got to be careful what you say, and Peter will tell you this. I mean, sometimes you can't say that, you can't say this, so you end up trying to find a sentence that's more or less saying nothing, because a certain part of the game demands exactly that. But over the years, I've begun to really enjoy it, and I know there's a big cult following out there. I went to Eastern Europe a couple of seasons ago, and 3 guys in a hotel were all over me, and I'm like looking around thinking, is this one of those wind-up shows? I was in Belgrade in Serbia, and I couldn't believe the attention I was getting because of Pro Evolution Soccer.
Yeah. Okay, final question, because I think this is where the 3 of us have really had our best conversations when time permits. Which stadium has the best food?
Arsenal.
Very important question. Arsenal.
Arsenal.
Okay.
Arsenal or Chelsea?
See, there are 3, maybe 4. It was always Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester City. They were always in the 3, not necessarily, putting them in order. But Tottenham Hotspur, I think, have arrived on the scene now with their new stadium. And their food is right up there too. So it's a toss-up.
Yeah, exactly.
The highlight of this job is the ability to get free food. That's all I can say right now. Gentlemen, I believe my time is up. So I know you probably have dinners to get to, etc. So I'm going to leave you be. But I really hope to see you again very, very soon at a match. Not too distant future, fingers crossed. But in the meantime, please be safe. Please take care of yourselves. And we'll see each other soon.
Cheers, Adam. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you.
Great to see you too. Bye.
Bye.